In the Northern Territory, the rates of domestic, family and sexual violence are the highest in the country. You're 7 times more likely to be killed by your partner than anywhere else. Since the year 2000, 81 women have been killed by their partners. 76 of them were Aboriginal. 4 of those women, Kumanjayi Haywood, Ngeygo Ragurrk, Miss Yunupiŋu and Kumarn Rubuntja, have this year been at the centre of the Territory's biggest coronial inquest into domestic, family and sexual violence. Over 8 weeks, spread across 6 months, their deaths at the hands of their partners have been dissected in coroner's courts in Darwin and Alice Springs. Devastating evidence, some of which can't even be published, has brought to light the broken, under-resourced and completely overwhelmed system in the Northern Territory.
Part of the problem we have sometimes is people believe that it's not something that we can stop, but it absolutely is. Those deaths are preventable if we really put our minds and invest in the way that we need to.
Kumanjayi Haywood was 34 years old when in November 2021 she sent a heartbreaking series of final text messages to a loved one. "He's going to kill me tonight. Love you so much. Don't cry for me," she wrote. That night, as she hid in the bathroom of an Alice Springs home, Kumanjayi Dixon poured fuel on the door and set it on fire. More than 40 reported incidents of violence between the pair over the course of their 20-year relationship were detailed in court. The brutal attacks involved knives, rocks and furniture being used as weapons, and those were only the assaults which were reported, likely just a snapshot of what she endured. 6 weeks before she was killed, Ms Haywood tried desperately to call police from a payphone in a remote community 200 kilometres from Alice Springs. 7 000 calls in less than 2 hours. "Please help me right now. I'll be dead in 1 minute. Please help me. He's got a warrant. Can you send the policeman, please? I waited for police to come, but they never come. Do you want my dead body to be here? I don't want to die." 12 hours later, police arrived, but the interaction was described as pathetic. Visibly injured and inside her violent partner's family home, Ms Haywood didn't want to make a formal statement. Police instead arresting her on an outstanding warrant and taking her to Alice Springs. The inquiry began to unravel the shortfalls in police responses to domestic violence. 3 days before lighting the fatal fire, the coroner heard Kumanjayi Dixon was arrested for breaching a DVO, but mistakes were made in filling out the paperwork, which meant that despite his long and violent history, police recommended him for bail. His bail conditions meant he had to leave Tennant Creek, where they'd been staying, but despite orders, he took Kumanjayi Haywood with him. Coercion, the coroner heard, was at the centre of almost all violent relationships.
Ultimately, women do want to be with their partners. Women do love their partners. They really just want the violence to stop.
Ms Haywood's partner, Kumanjayi Dixon, was also killed in the fire. The cracks in the system started to show early and became even clearer when the coroner examined the brutal death of Ngeygo Ragurrk. The 40-year-old was beaten to death and left in the shallow waters of Darwin's Mindle Beach, a prolonged and very public attack that Garsick Norridge carried out on his wife. Witnesses could hear her screams, but no one called 000. Garsick Norridge later claimed she'd drowned and began telling what Counsel Assisting called a whole stack of lies.
So you're saying she had these cuts on her head before she went down the beach?
Yeah. That's not from me, brother. I don't hit my wife.
I call bullshit.
But Norridge was let go that night, just as he had been earlier that morning.
I had an argument with my missus and I burned his car.
You burnt it?
Yes. I was getting angry for it and I told her I'm gonna burn the car and I did. I did burn the car. I'm sorry, you take me.
The coroner was told the officers didn't realise they could arrest someone for setting fire to their own property, making clear to the inquest opportunities were missed just hours before Ms Ragurrk was killed. But the coroner heard mistakes were also made after. Norridge was initially charged with murder, but many pieces of evidence were ruled inadmissible in court, and he was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter. For Ms. Ragurrk's family, the inquest was the first time they heard the full story of what happened to their loved one, and an opportunity for the coroner to return the last of her belongings. 29-year-old Miss Yunupiŋu was isolated and under crushing pressure to return to her violent partner when, within weeks of his release from jail for another assault, Neil Marika stabbed her in the heart. Violence, the coroner heard, had been part of her everyday life. Marika's first brutal assault put Miss Yunupiŋu in hospital when she was just 16. Over the next decade, he was in and out of jail for violent attacks against her. The rehabilitation programs he accessed in prison were ineffective. The government family safety framework that Miss Yunupiŋu was on for several years wasn't able to protect her. Neither was the 5-year non-contact domestic violence order, which was in place on the night he killed her.
He's said he's going to change. Hey, don't do this. I'm going to change. You don't need to make a statement to police. And women will believe them. It could be that they've received pressure from other people. It could be women have nowhere else to go. They've got to return to that house more often than not.
Victim survivors are forced to carry the burden of violence, the coroner heard, and are often blamed when their partners are jailed. A well-known anti-violence campaigner, not even Kumarn Rubuntja's closest friends knew she was struggling. Over the course of her 20-month relationship with Malcolm Abbott, a man who had already been jailed for the manslaughter of another woman, Miss Rubuntja was never referred to a support service, despite 22 calls to police for help. On the night she was murdered, Ms. Rubuntja and Abbott had been drinking at a pub in Alice Springs. She told staff she was scared, but they were both kicked out. She escaped to the hospital. Her friends say she thought she'd be safe there, but a drunk and angry Malcolm Abbott found her and repeatedly ran over her with his car, just metres from the emergency room. Ms. Rubuntja's murder sparked a movement in Alice Springs.
We always say we are not just numbers. Do you hear? We're not just numbers. We're humans. We are not visible women. Our sister, another one lost to a dearly, a passionate person.
But like the stories of many Aboriginal women killed by their partners, the headlines disappeared quickly and the national outcry was nowhere to be seen. Despite Ms. Rubuntja's tireless efforts on the national stage to shine a light on the struggles of women like her and her family in town camps across the Northern Territory, her loved ones left behind, carrying on her work.
Domestic violence is a story out there to everyone to open their eyes and, it's not always their business, it's everybody's business.
The inquiry's evidence painted a clear picture from the start. The entire domestic violence system in the Northern Territory is buckling under the pressure of demand. Each of the 4 men responsible for the deaths of their partners had a long history of using violence, and they'd all been jailed because of it. So why didn't the rehabilitation programs in prison work? The short answer, there's not enough funding to roll them out to everyone who needs them. Each of the women had tried to get help from police and women's shelters, so why couldn't they protect them? The short answer again, there's not enough money. Police say they're under-resourced, dealing with a 117% increase in domestic violence reports this decade, and not nearly enough boots on the ground. While frontline providers are forced to turn victim survivors away almost every day.
Over time, our funding is eroded. It means we have to consider what are the priorities of our service, what do we need to give up in order to continue providing a basic, frontline, essential service.
And while the focus is often on protecting women, the coroner heard there are very few services in the NT for perpetrators.
We need to be putting attention into primary prevention, into intervening as early as we can when we see behaviours that are problematic. And a lot of what we talk about in terms of family, domestic and sexual violence is the response, the pointy end of the system, but we also need to be thinking about healing and recovery, and that all of those aspects of our service system need to be joined up. We need to be thinking about how we invest in them, and absolutely it is preventable.
The inquiry heard the cost of family violence to the Territory every year is up to $600 million. Experts asked the government last year for $180 million over 5 years to address the problem. The budget allocated $20 million over 2 years. A drop in the ocean, the coroner heard, for a problem plaguing families for generations. A drop in the ocean, the coroner heard, for a problem